I guess a lot of those voices that were really prominent in the hard lockdown have suddenly disappeared. I know we've all got businesses to run, but at the same time, the hospitality industry isn't out of the weeds completely. We've got a lot of work to do, and I think I'd be interested in seeing who's going to jump up and start flying the flag again.
This week on Dirty Linen, we are talking about representation in the hospitality industry. Who are the people that bring the industry together, work out the conversations that need to be had, and who to have them with? Someone who's really made a place for himself in this space is Michael Bascetta. He owns multiple venues in Melbourne, and he is a founder of Worksmith, a hospitality hub that has certainly been a very active player through the pandemic. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dani. Thanks for having me.
Oh my goodness, if I think about the times we've caught up during the year, I haven't spoken to you for months, but I think the last time we spoke, it was just like, we're just in the throes of it, right? Like it's been such a year of
chaos.
Yeah, just so much. And Worksmith has been so active as a source of information, of online forums, such a safe space online where people have been able to ask questions, throw ideas around, and just sort of navigate these extremely choppy waters. But of course, you've been running venues and, you're an employer through this. Can you just give us a little, I suppose, an outline of your busy life and the different hats that you wear?
Yeah, a bit of a difficult one. I never thought that something could simultaneously affect all the businesses at exactly the same time, but in differing ways. And across the three venues and Worksmith, it's been a huge challenge, to move the business really quickly to ensure survival, but then also, really front of mind throughout the whole time was how we can look after the teams throughout COVID, and that was definitely the hardest bit that we've gone through and going through is ensuring that the teams are happy and safe all the way through this thing. Number of the venues with Falco and Capitano, we haven't closed one day this year. And Liberty has kind of been up and down depending on what sort of project we were leading with at the time. So there's a lot to manage and a lot of people to help, but we're really lucky that we've got really strong leadership in each venue that really took it upon themselves a lot of the time to really execute the projects we were working on and lead the teams there.
I mean, you're a really interesting restaurateur in that the businesses are so different. I mean, so Falco, it's a bakery, and that's the newest of your businesses, isn't it? So that's in Collingwood, and I guess that people were always wanting bread, and it was one of the things we were allowed to go out for. So, in a sense, it's reasonably well placed. And Capitano, with I guess Italian, but with pizza, like that's probably reasonably well placed for takeaway.
Exactly. Yeah. We're really lucky. We opened Falco exactly a year ago now, so we sort of had our roots down on Smith Street for a few months before COVID hit. Enough people knew about us, and a lot of venues around us obviously closed at the first lockdown, and things really took off for us at Falco, and we were able to, because as you're saying, the other venues are so different. We still offered takeaway pizza at Capitano and added more products to that line. And what we did is basically shuffle people around the venues, mostly to Falco, as there was a huge spike. And really lucky that we had that outlet to be able to sell retail. And we did a little wine store out of there, which went really well with the Bar Liberty team. And now we continue to sell wines out of there, just on a smaller scale. Yeah, so I've never loved that we've got three venues. Like, I love all my venues, obviously, but I've never loved that they're all so different. But then during COVID, it's been saving grace because we're able to sort of leverage off each one as needed, as things changed.
Yeah, well, I suppose people always say in business, not to have all your eggs in one basket and to be diverse. And I guess you did that. You didn't know why you were so smart in doing that, but indeed you were. And so just to round it out for people who don't know the other business, so Bar Liberty is it's like a really beautiful bar with, I guess, small plates of food. Just it doesn't really lend itself to an out of restaurant experience. So yes, it's great that you're able to move staff around. But of course, Worksmith, which is the hospitality hub that you founded, that's also a business, isn't it? I mean, you've got two premises. It was a co-working space. You had events there. So, I mean, tell me about. Let's talk about what Worksmith does for the community in a minute. But first of all, just talk about how it's been running that as a business through 2020.
Yeah, Worksmith sits at the exact junction of hospitality and office. So the two worst impacted areas during COVID. So we shut our spaces straight away through the first lockdown, and all of our revenue was gone straight away because of that, because we rely on membership fees to use the spaces permanently or casually. So turning that off meant that we had to switch really quickly to other sources of revenue. So doing a number of advisory projects through Worksmith, which we've done for a long time, but then also we turned our attention straight away to obviously assisting the industry as best we could. And it was 2 days before lockdown, we started a really simple Facebook group. We thought a few hundred people would be on there, just based around providing a spot that people could go to, as you said, ask questions and sort of in a safe space. And within a week, there was 10,000 members on that Facebook page, and we obviously we already knew that the industry is very fragmented, and obviously we're talking about representation today, but we really found through COVID, or have found, that there's no one source of information for the industry, and we've done a whole suite of sort of website updates to really capture a lot of industry-based content, resources, and tools that we continue to sort of pump out through Worksmith and ensure that we're supporting people across venues, and also food and wine producers and the like, that all sort of intersect with hospitality.
So give us an example of the kind of resources that you were offering.
Yeah, so during COVID, we built something. It's quite simple, but it's online. A lot of people have used it. It's a venue feasibility calculator, and it's based off the restrictions, so square meter restrictions, and off the back of that, understanding how many how many people you can have in your spaces. Number one, obviously from a COVID restriction standpoint, but then also it builds a P&L based off the back of that, and it includes job keeper payments as well. So then you can really look at it and understand, can I open my venue in the 4 square meter rule when it was in, now 2 square meter, doesn't actually make sense and stack up that I can break even or somewhat profit through this period. And the day we launched that, for the first week, we had 400 entries into that, with people using the tool, which is really exciting. So we're really starting to develop that tool out further.
Yeah, that is really amazing. I mean, I guess when you started Worksmith, could you have imagined that those were the kinds of things that you were going to be helping people with?
Definitely not. We started our first space in Collingwood, and the idea was just to have a meeting space for people in the industry that could physically work out of, come to events, do some training and that sort of thing. And it really quickly moved into a sort of larger sphere of support for the industry. We run Melbourne Cocktail Festival as well, so it's a consumer-facing event with some industry parts to it as well, which is all about sort of empowering people in bars and sort of cocktail culture and brands in Australia. And we've really found ourselves in this position where we want to support industry from a number of different ways. And as COVID has obviously been really difficult and financially really distressing, but it's actually given us a little bit of time as well to sort of stop as our spaces weren't in operation, and then really understand what we're doing.
So did you start Worksmith because you felt that there was a lack of that kind of gathering place, whether it was real or virtual? And as far as like the resources that you developed, did you feel like that wasn't being offered from, let's say, restaurant and catering or some of other industry organisations, Australian Hotels Association? Do you feel like those organisations that have been around, whether it's that they've been around for longer or that they're doing other things, like where did you sort of perceive the need and the gap?
Well, I think to sort of answer the first part of that question is that people, when you're trying to build a venue or start a product or anything that's around hospitality, there's no spot to go and work out of other than a cafe or just a general co-working space. And my co-founder Roscoe had spent a lot of time in co-working around the world and found that the best ones that were the most engaging were the ones that were really focused in a certain area. That's when you could really focus on specific events and topics that were really important in that particular industry. And then also have a lot of people intersecting and learning from each other as well as collaborating. And it's really easy to sort of say that, oh, you just open a space and people will collaborate. It takes a long time for those things to happen. And we've had members come through that spend a couple of weeks here, and then their feedback when they leave, no longer a member, is that, oh, I didn't really meet anyone yet. And it's like, well, you need to put in a lot to get something out. We've seen some across this time, a lot of people start working together, creating products together, doing events together and the like. And I think there's never been a space for that to happen. And when I was starting in hospitality in Melbourne, like I loved where I worked and learned a hell of a lot in all the restaurants I worked in, but I never felt that I was part of something bigger than the four walls that I was in. And although the restaurants I worked in here and in London as well were incredible, the classic sort of hospo thing, you work long hours and you work really hard and you learn a lot, but then you're sort of wrecked on the weekend and then there's no connection with the greater industry. It wasn't until I opened my first venue in Bar Liberty that I started meeting a lot more people in the industry, and I thought that was brilliant. And then started something with a few friends called Grow Assembly. We were doing that for a while, and that was just a day event of talks for the industry. And sort of Worksmith blossomed off the back of Grow Assembly and seeing what can happen when people can gather, and that was just on one day. And my thinking was, well, what if we had this as a physical space ongoing? And we've seen after close to 3 years of operation that what's come off the back of Worksmith existing is really exciting, with the number of businesses that work in and around our spaces, the partnerships we've formed, and then also the businesses that have been born within the Worksmith company as well. And I think, to your second question around resources and what we've built, I've never really found it very easily accessible from an industry standpoint for the industry association. Straight away, you have to be a member to find anything that's around the resources. They have some things that are free, but really surface level. Then you have to pay up. Obviously, we need to make money as well. We're a private company, and the important thing for us though is that we are providing upfront value. And through COVID, we've just provided literally everything we've built or written, or we've written a lot of manuals as well about communication and operations and COVID safe and everything else, and that's all been completely free to anyone that jumps online. And we felt through this time that it was important to do that, as the industry is really on its knees and shouldn't have to stump up money to be able to access that information.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's an amazing amount of work. I mean, it's basically a pandemic encyclopedia that people can access, and that's the sort of resources that are there all the time. But then you've also done a lot of forums. Can you talk about some of the topics that you've covered in those forums?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done over 40 events since COVID sort of hit, and we've done everything, spoken about everything from JobKeeper updates or representation in the industry, as we're chatting about today, as well as mental health in the industry, like right, a huge spectrum. Visa worker support, really across the board, and we're really focused just on what was coming up. JobKeeper, when JobKeeper got released, ensuring that we're covering that, how to submit your information, who's eligible, who's not. And really ensuring that we were jumping on those things as they came up.
I mean, with your different hats, as a business owner, but also with this Worksmith hat on as well, how did you find that sort of juggling that onslaught of information and the overwhelm that sometimes comes with that, but then also being this person, that's part of an organization that's trying to sift it and organize it? Was it, how was that?
It was super difficult, number one, but then also obviously helpful to my businesses that I was already undertaking more detailed sort of, I guess, research and understanding of different rules, regulations, and information that was coming out. So I was able to feed that back really quickly. But then at the same time, every Sunday when the the inevitable announcement was being made, it was obviously a lot of note taking, and then straight away fielding calls from different people, whether in my businesses or outside of tomorrow. A lot of the time, it was the next day of that it was something was happening. So having to shift people around, change rosters, change what we do in venue, but then also make sure that on the Worksmith side we're getting that information out as well.
I mean, it was so hard because you'd get those announcements from Dan Andrews here in Victoria on a Sunday, but a lot of the detail wouldn't follow until, during it sort of drip feed through the week, how those sort of broad brush announcements were actually to be applied. So I'm sure that was a tricky thing for you to manage in terms of, you're such a resource for information, but you just didn't have, or, you couldn't have all the information at your fingertips, the minute that it was released. So yeah, quite frustrating. I was sort of in the middle of some of those conversations as well, and you just think, well, don't just tell us half of the stuff we need. Can we just have all the detail?
Yeah, and that's definitely a bit of a frustration all the way through. As you say, it's like you you have to change your plans, 24 hours out, some of the time, or even a week, which sounds like a lot, but it's not. And then to have an understanding of something, and then it completely changes once the detail comes out. It was certainly frustrating for the whole industry.
Yeah, and when you've got customers that think that, oh, now you can have 20 people, or now I can have, 20 at the table.
Yeah, exactly. Why can't I sit down? Yeah, things like that. Yeah.
Do you think that it's been a time of coming together or a time of fragmentation for the hospitality industry overall?
I think both in a way. I think a lot of people really jump to it and sort out helping people, which is amazing. And I really love the industry. I love the industry so much. That's why I'm in it. That's why we do Worksmith. But then at the same time, I think a lot of people were given a lot of airtime, I guess, as a sort of mouthpiece for the industry. And some people were aligned with that, some people weren't. And I felt that there's a lot of people in the industry that didn't align with a lot of the, I guess, rhetoric that was coming out of those people, and then sort of talk about sort of broad brush sort of ideas that a lot of people then thought, well, that's how the whole hospitality industry thinks. And I found that really difficult, and I guess continue to. And a lot of the time, the people that were sort of standing up and sort of quasi flying the flag, they had a lot of there's a lot of revenue and their own money at stake, which at the end of the day, we all build businesses. They're for profit. We need to make a profit to live and pay our staff and all the rest. But I found it really difficult that people were not we're not in medicine, right? And people making wild claims about hospitality and why it's safe and all these sort of things without actually looking at the facts. And now we find ourselves with how many days now without community transmission because we went through the heartache, and it was incredibly difficult.
Yeah, I agree with you, Michael, and I think it was interesting that I suppose it's obvious the loudest voices are going to be the ones that get heard, but it certainly did seem that that I guess the Unlock Hospitality Brigade was speaking as though for the whole industry, and it's I suppose the reason I wanted to do this week of talking about representation was, as much as anything else, it was to make it clear that nobody can speak for the whole industry, as much as there are great voices and different voices and people that do gather the opinions of others, I suppose, around them, or they're a funnel for those views. But it is such a disparate industry, and that's one of the things that makes it fantastic. It's the diversity that we celebrate, and the idea that anybody can speak for the whole industry, not only in what's wanted, but also in what's possible in terms of operating in a COVID safe manner. I just found that quite scary. actually, from a health perspective, and I guess disappointing as a member of a community that it felt like it was just going to be better for everyone if we were as much as possible on the same page and working to a common goal. And it 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 wouldn't be a bad thing to just have a slight tiny bit of um contrition, like a bit of, actually, it's pretty good to be, really open now. And it's really great to have, be heading towards 50 days of no community transmission. And we are like bloody lucky, as you say. But anyway, I guess good luck to everyone. Everyone can benefit from having virtually eliminated the virus. But yeah, things did get a bit fragmented along the way.
Yeah, I think really looking at it, that I guess a lot of those voices that were really prominent in the hard lockdown have suddenly disappeared. I know we've all got businesses to run, but at the same time, the hospitality industry isn't out of the weeds completely. We've got a lot of work to do. We need the return of international visa holders and international students. There's a huge gap in jobs to fulfill. I've never found it so difficult to find people in venue, and I'm hearing the same thing from absolutely everyone. So there's still a lot to work on, and I think I'd be interested in seeing who's going to jump up and start flying the flag again.
Yeah, well, so would you like to hear a lot more noise about bringing internationals back? Is that sort of like the main thing that you think is an issue for hospitality?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are some of the other big struggles right now? I mean, we've spoken, during the year about internationals, and it's been a big focus for both of us. It was so foreseeable that if these people leave, apart from the social justice around it, it's going to be an issue for the industry rebuilding. And lo and behold, this very predictable scenario has eventuated, and there's a massive hole in the employment pool. So yeah, that's frustratingly predictable. It seems like a tricky one, though. Can you really foresee a situation where even a proportion of those internationals will return?
I think anyone with a visa other than working holiday should be given rights to come back if they can. A lot of these people, like I know people personally that have been here over 5 years, paid taxes that whole time, and then were hung out to dry by the government. I find that really disgusting. Like, why do they pay tax if they're not going to be supported in times of need? I guess that's the most frustrating piece, is that, as you say, it's completely predictable this was going to happen, and our federal government couldn't see past the right wing facade that they put up and espouse, that we're not going to look at the human cost of doing this to people, and then also the effect on business. And I think if we had sat back and actually looked at what the effect could be, then maybe we wouldn't be in this position, and these people would still be here, especially on top of the accounting shortfall that was shown very early in the JobKeeper release, that we could have supported every single visa worker and still been way under the budget that they put forward.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is a great economic cost to businesses not being able to reopen as much as they would like to. People who've got a few venues, they can only open, 2 of them. They can only open 5 days a week, not 7, because there simply aren't the staff. I mean, that hampers everybody's economic recovery. So it is very frustrating. What are some of the other big issues for hospitality in Australia going into next year, Michael?
I think a lot of it is based around employment, whether it's employment shortfall, but also just obviously before COVID, we had a lot of issues around employment and underpayment, and they were never addressed. There's things in the award that still aren't quite right for hospitality. A lot of hospitality owners have no idea how the award actually works and how it relates to them. So there needs to be a lot of education around that as we really start to turn on our venues. So I really want to have a big focus, would love to have a bit more focus around employment in general, both for fulfilling the gap, but also how we can do it better going forward. On top of that, it's going to be really interesting with landlords coming out of COVID. Some landlords gave support, even though and then many didn't. I know a number of operators that are still actually having to take people to VCAT to actually get some rent relief, and these are venues that have hardly been open throughout COVID, and to landlords that have multiple properties that are stacked on top of each other. So it'll be interesting what will happen from a government perspective in regards to landlords and further rent relief, and or working out how that's going to work going forward. I think on the landlord front, it's super interesting time. There was already a glut of spaces in Melbourne and certainly Sydney as well, pre-COVID. And now we've seen this really an overcorrection in the industry and a number of venues closing. Is that there's just going to be more spaces. So landlords can't be steadfast in not giving rent relief or giving decent terms to hospitality operators, because there's just not going to be, there's no one in line to fulfill those spaces.
Well, do you think that's a similar scenario for staff, where no staff should have to put up with being underpaid at the moment because there is such high demand?
Exactly. Any staff member that's being overworked, underpaid, and the rest shouldn't have to stick around. And it's really, I think through COVID, everyone wanted a lot of security, which I completely understand. And I think staff might still be thinking in that way, but now it's really switched, and we're seeing larger venue groups that are offering sign-on bonuses of over $1,000 to get. Doesn't matter if you're a manager or a waiter or whatever else, you'll get a bonus. Incentives from current staff to bring new staff on as well. And we're seeing a lot of that sort of happening in the industry at the moment, just to try and fulfill those roles.
And from the award point of view, what are the things in the award that you think need to be looked at?
I think for us, it's just clarity around, a lot is being worked on around the casual front. And I really believe that people need flexibility. The ones that need it. But then also, how does that work in with business? And I think there's a bit of a gap at the moment as to securing a casual worker for the long term, which I really would want to do in my venues. We don't. Our venues require a fair amount of training and commitment to our staff to get them to where they need to be, which is certainly a cost of doing business. But then for them to turn around and leave or give zero notice on a couple of days before they're meant to work is really hard for our small businesses as well. So working out a middle ground where we can actually give casuals more of a permanent part-time job, which we do a lot of the time, but then also having that reflect in their pay. So I think there needs to be a lot more engagement with industry, and then also how we discuss this and get that information out to all business owners in a really succinct way that's really easy to digest, that not only employers can read and obviously implement, but then employees also know their rights. And I think that's the problem, a big problem in hospitality as well, is not only employers doing the wrong thing, in some instances, but also employees actually just don't knowing where they stand. And a lot of people running through this industry can be for the short term, which we do rely on these people. Also, don't really look at it from a standpoint that, okay, this is my job, I need to actually know my rights around it. So really ensuring that people educate themselves, so they don't get themselves in a situation where an employer can exploit them.
Yeah. And do you feel like Worksmith or you have a seat at the table when any of these things are being discussed in an official way?
We do in some instances through COVID, we have, but anything around legislation, we haven't had a seat at the table as of yet. But it's something that I'm personally, in Worksmith as a whole, is really pushing for as having that seat. The difficulty is because we're not an association, becomes the difficult part. But we do represent, I guess, segments of the industry that are really underrepresented at a government level.
Yeah. How do you go about being one of those people that can wade into those discussions? Keep knocking on the door?
Yeah, keep knocking on the door and flying the flag. And we've been involved in a number of those conversations through COVID, as I said, which we're really grateful for having that opportunity and trying to be a slightly different voice to the norm. But ongoing, we need to relook at how our associations speak to government, because whilst I understand restaurant caterers, AHA, these associations have been around for a long time, is that their membership base is actually decreasing. I don't know. I think, all the venue operators I know. I don't know many that are part of restaurant caterers or the rest. And I certainly think there's a place for the current associations. Absolutely, I'm not saying they shouldn't exist, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done to catch up with what's happening in industry in areas that they don't really represent either. There's a lot of venue owners that certainly aren't part of these associations, but then these associations are speaking to government on behalf of us, and that's the concerning piece for me. Is that I don't pay my dues. I'm not part of these associations, and really having them then leading up to government around legislation or whatever else is happening at the time, COVID being a huge one, is that they're then speaking on our behalf, even though we don't elect them.
It's a really tricky one, because from a government point of view, obviously they're just going to want to go, okay, restaurants, who do we talk to? Oh, these people with restaurant in the title, they must be the people. You can't talk to an industry. You can't talk to everyone in an industry, but it's a really tricky one, because you have a different voice, but you still don't represent everybody. No one can. So I guess it's finding that balance between having different voices but not just having a cacophony of voices.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Like, I certainly don't think I represent a whole industry by any stretch of the imagination, but I certainly think cafes, small bars, a big part of our industry are underrepresented at a government level, but then also restaurant caterers, AHA, then represent segments of the industry that, whilst their focus is those areas, aren't speaking on behalf of all those people directly.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. But I think I think it would be really great for Worksmith and yourself to have to be part of those conversations. So, Michael, it's been really a massive year, a year that none of us could have predicted, but we are almost at the end of it. How are you feeling, and how are you looking forward to 2021?
Definitely fatigued, as with a lot of people are. Running into December is always stressful anyway in hospitality, but couple that with full reopening of venues and Worksmith and the rest, it's just a really tiring end of the year. I'm definitely looking forward to 2021, because we hopefully put a lot of this behind us. I've also got another baby coming in January, so something to be actually excited about.
Congrats!
Thank you. So really eye on the prize for the new baby. But with the industry, I think we're always going to face we will face some unique challenges in 2021. I think some people have a little bit of false sense of security right now. JobKeeper's still in. We're running into December when all of Melbourne was shut down previous to that, so there's a lot of hungry and thirsty people that need to do a lot of celebrating heading into December. So we're seeing our numbers jump up, which is great. We need that. My fear is January and Feb and really onwards, in that we don't have large scale events continuing. We don't have any international travel. Interested to see how that will look. Obviously, we don't have international travel going the other way with people leaving, although a few might go to New Zealand with the new announcement. But apart from that, I'm interested to see the movement of people in and out of our cities, and a lot of Melbourne people get out for January, I'm sure. But interested to see if other people then come in to replace those and keep our venues sort of ticking over through that time.
Yeah. Well, I'll be out there eating and drinking.
Yes, absolutely.
It is so great to see Melbourne come back to life. Obviously, still tricky times ahead of us, but certainly rather be here now than where we were in August or September.
Absolutely. We're in a much better position.
Yeah. Michael, it's been an absolute pleasure to chat to you. Really grateful for your perspective, and congratulations on everything that you've done and that Worksmith has done through the year. And I'm so happy that your venues are all of them are open and that people can come in, sit down and enjoy what you do. Thank you so much.
No worries at all. Thanks, Dani. Cheers.
This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about. We spend a week thrashing around each issue, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.
It's a really tricky one because, from a government point of view, I can...